The sun was still high over the valley of Oak Haven, Pennsylvania, casting a warm amber glow over rows of identical suburban porches. It was 4:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, the quiet in-between hour when lawnmowers hum in the distance and kitchen windows glow with early dinner light. On Blackwood Lane, that rhythm suddenly stopped. 10-year-old Leo and his 7-year-old sister Mia weren't running home from school like usual. They weren't arguing, they weren't laughing. They were walking. Their steps were slow, even, perfectly synchronized.
Mrs. Gable, who was trimming her rose bushes across the street, later told investigators something felt off immediately. She waved and called their names. They didn't react. They didn't look distracted. They didn't look upset. They didn't look afraid. They looked focused, as if listening to something no one else could hear. The siblings crossed the pavement where trimmed lawns gave way to the dense brush lining the Elderberry River, a stretch of water locals describe as deceptively calm from a distance, but powerful beneath the surface. Leo reached for Mia's hand. There was no rush, no visible panic, no sign of hesitation. They stepped through the tall reeds, then into the soft mud along the bank. The water rose gradually, ankles, knees, waist. Anyone watching might expect splashing, a sudden turn, a startled reaction to the cold. But witnesses would later say the river remained strangely quiet. By the time first responders arrived 20 minutes later, the surface of the Elderberry looked undisturbed. No broken reeds, no frantic markings along the shoreline. What unsettled investigators most wasn't what they found that evening. It was what they didn't. There were no clear signs of distress, no obvious attempt to retreat, no indication of the instinctive fight most people experience in dangerous water. And that single detail would turn a tragic afternoon into a mystery that Oak Haven still struggles to explain. Because the question wasn't just what happened, it was why nothing seemed to interrupt it. When the medical examiner began the initial evaluation, the case took its first unsettling turn. In a typical water-related fatality, the body reacts automatically. The airway spasms. The lungs attempt to draw in air, and water is often found inside the respiratory system as the body fights to stabilize itself. But Leo and Mia's lungs were clear. There were no classic indicators of prolonged struggle, no sediment deep in the airway, no signs of panic-driven inhalation beneath the surface. The preliminary conclusion pointed toward a rare but documented reflex response, a sudden laryngospasm, where the airway closes abruptly when exposed to cold water. It can happen in extreme shock conditions. What made investigators pause wasn't the phenomenon itself, it was the timing. For that response to occur in both children within seconds of entering the river suggested something highly unusual. Not impossible, but statistically rare. And that was only the beginning. During recovery, divers noticed Leo's right hand was tightly clenched. His fingers were rigid, locked around something small enough to fit inside his palm. When they carefully opened his hand, they didn't find debris from the riverbed.
They found a wooden token. It was smooth from years of handling, roughly the size of a large coin, hand-carved. On one side, a weeping willow tree. On the other, a single word carved with deliberate precision. Invited. Sarah Miller told detectives she had never seen the object before. It wasn't a toy. It wasn't from school. It wasn't part of any family keepsake. And Leo, by all accounts, had never used that word in conversation. The house search that followed deepened the mystery. Under Leo's mattress, investigators found a folded sheet of paper. Not a drawing of superheroes, not a spelling worksheet. A map. It was a detailed sketch of the Elderberry River, bends, shallow edges, tree lines, far more accurate than something copied from memory after a casual visit. Marked in the center channel was a single X.
Written at the bottom of the page was a date. 2 weeks before the incident. Detective Thorne would later admit that was the moment the case stopped feeling like a tragic accident and started feeling like a puzzle. Because the question shifted. It wasn't just what happened in the river. It was what had been forming long before they ever reached it.
In the weeks that followed, grief in Oak Haven transformed into something else: analysis. The unanswered questions surrounding the medical findings, the carved token, and the dated map made it difficult for the town to settle on a simple explanation. People needed context, a framework, something rational to place around an event that felt anything but ordinary. The first avenue investigators explored was digital influence. Every device in the Miller household was examined: phones, tablets, laptops, gaming systems. Authorities looked for signs of outside communication, online coercion, or hidden communities that might have influenced the children's behavior. Nothing surfaced. No unusual search history, no secret accounts, no unexplained messages. In fact, digital activity had decreased in the days leading up to the incident. According to family members, Leo and Mia had been spending more time outdoors, often sitting quietly on the back porch, facing the tree line near the river. Several neighbors recalled hearing a low humming sound during that period. Subtle, almost mechanical. It wasn't loud enough to draw attention at the time. Only afterward did it become significant. When the digital trail yielded no answers, psychologists were consulted. Some proposed the possibility of a rare shared behavioral state, a phenomenon in which one individual's intense focus or altered perception influences another. In extremely uncommon cases, closely bonded siblings can mirror each other's emotional responses in profound ways. But even that theory struggled to explain the planning implied by the map. Then attention shifted toward the river itself. A local historian uncovered records of past water-related incidents along the Elderberry dating back more than a century. While the details varied, certain patterns were unsettling: paired cases, minimal signs of struggle, cold water conditions, reports of unusual stillness. Skeptics argued coincidence. Statisticians warned against pattern recognition bias, but others began looking at environmental factors. Geologists pointed out that the river runs over limestone caverns known to produce low-frequency vibrations under certain pressure conditions. Acoustic specialists explained that infrasound, sound below the threshold of human hearing, has been documented to cause feelings of unease, disorientation, and altered perception in controlled laboratory settings. Could something in the river's geography produce subtle sensory effects? There was no definitive evidence, but the question lingered. As public speculation grew, the emotional toll on the Miller family deepened. Sarah Miller began reporting what she described as the echo, a faint vibration she believed she could hear late at night. Counselors attributed it to trauma-related sensory imprinting, a well-documented psychological response after sudden loss. One night, she was found standing near the riverbank after midnight, not attempting anything harmful, but simply staring at the water. When asked what she was doing, she reportedly said, "I just want to understand what they were focused on." That sentence stayed with Detective Thorne long after the investigation slowed, because focus was the recurring theme, not panic, not chaos, focus, and that distinction unsettled him more than anything else. The Elderberry River eventually returned to its ordinary rhythm. The flood levels receded, the reeds grew back. From a distance, nothing about the landscape suggests it holds unanswered questions. The case was officially ruled an accidental cold water event, complicated by rare physiological response. But in Oakhaven, the emotional aftermath didn't follow official language. The Miller house changed owners. The memorial near the riverbank, a small stack of smooth stones, remains. No plaque, no inscription, just a quiet marker placed by neighbors who wanted something physical to anchor their confusion. Why does this story continue to circulate beyond Oakhaven? Because it disrupts a fundamental assumption. We are taught to fear visible threats, strangers, weapons, clear danger. This case offered none. There was no pursuit, no visible force, no clear trigger. Only two children moving with unusual certainty towards something no one else perceived. Theories continue online. Some insist it was environmental, a convergence of cold shock, geography, and psychological mirroring. Others believe the carved token and the map suggest influence we still don't understand. Recordings occasionally surface from visitors claiming to capture a faint low-frequency hum near the riverbank. Acoustic engineers attribute it to natural cavern resonance. Online forums debate whether infrasound can affect human perception in ways science has yet to fully measure. There is no proven evidence of anything beyond known physics, and yet the story lingers because it forces a difficult question. If subtle environmental factors can influence human behavior,